Okay, as Wendy said, I'm the director of the Administrative Data Research Centre for England, or ADRC-E, which is part of a network of research centres around the UK which form the Administrative Data Research Network. So, and what I plan to do in this talk is to describe a little about the background to setting up of the network, what the network can do to facilitate access to administrative data. I noticed the title of this session is called Sharing Difficult Data. So the aim of the network is to make it, or to facilitate access to, make it less difficult to access administrative data. So what I'm going to do, first of all, and I'm quite pleased because somebody over coffee asked me what is administrative data, so at least I think I'm aiming this talk at the right level for some people. So I'm going to start by saying what is administrative data and what is administrative data research. Give you an idea of the sorts of data that the Administrative Data Network are facilitating access to. So the aim is really to facilitate access to UK government data, including data held by the devolved administrations. And the impetus for the setting up of the network came from a report, the Administrative Data Task Force, and it made some recommendations, and it's perhaps worth just reflecting briefly on those recommendations and how far we've got along the journey. It hasn't been going that long. The task force, perhaps I should say, was reported the end of 2012, so it was set up pretty quickly, and we're on a journey to facilitate access to administrative data. Then a little bit about the network and how you can use it as researchers. So how you can join in with this journey to secure access to administrative data from central government for research purposes and ultimately public benefit. And so I'll say a little bit about that. So what is administrative data? Well, the main thing, I think the key thing that distinguishes administrative data perhaps from research data is the data has been collected not for research purposes. It's been collected for government departments or even companies in more general, and we might include clinical data in that, to deliver a service. So it was never collected to answer a research question or to become a research database. So we have all government departments are collecting administrative data, and I'll give you lists of some in a moment. We might think the Office for National Statistics collects the census, so we might be interested in that. That's a data set that is primarily collected for population statistics purposes, not for research, but as many of you may have used it or some samples from it, it is used for research. And we sort of include in there, or not purely administrative data, there are some large surveys that are undertaken to provide official statistics, like the Labour Force survey is a survey that is, one of its main aims is to be able to produce estimates of employment and unemployment, etc. So they are perhaps included in this area, though when we talk about administrative data, we often think about the data that is collected as part of the process. Surveys are slightly different, but some of them may come under the remit. And it has some of the challenges, and as I'll say later, but I'll say it now as well, this was funded under an initiative to look at big data. And although I wouldn't say administrative data is definitely big data, it comes with some of the challenges, particularly about representativeness. If you're trying to draw conclusions about a population where you haven't collected the data in some controlled way, a bit like if you scrape the web or look at Twitter data, looking at administrative data, one of the questions is this a representative data set of which we can draw conclusions to determine policy? The type of research, well, as I've started to allude upon, there is both substantive research, so using administrative data to answer particular research questions, and I might give you a few examples as I go through, but I'm not going to focus on any particular example in this presentation. And of course, methodological research about how best to use and overcome the challenges of using administrative data. And one of the main things that we'd like to do with administrative data is to link data from different administrative sources to enhance the data and perhaps learn more about society. It has gone on in the past, and this is perhaps where it getting the data has taken individuals a lot of time and negotiations, and the aim of the network is to perhaps smooth and make it easier for individual researchers to get access to the data by helping them. There are teams of experts have been drawn up, people who have experience in these sorts of areas to help researchers gain access to the data, to do some of the negotiations that we heard about from the UK Data Service. In some senses, as you'll see, I'll also mention later, the part of the network is based at Essex and very close to the UK Data Service, and is using that expertise to negotiate with access to data from governments. So the ADRN is set up to make it, to facilitate access, particularly simpler for the researcher to get access to administrative data for research purposes. So just a little bit on the sorts of research that's been undertaken currently, and it may be areas that people want to get interested in. Clearly, if we're going to link administrative data sets in a country where we don't have a registration, a register and a unique identifier for individuals, there's going to be some trouble with just linking the data. So there's a large amount of research being done, and maybe this will facilitate even more research looking at how do you just link two individuals from, say, a health data set where they may have national insurance number with a tax data set where you may have did I say national insurance? Where you may have national health number with a tax data set where we have national insurance number. And how do you ensure the quality of that data? So that is a methodological question, and there is some work in how you do this. The reliability of your conclusions may depend on, or in fact your conclusions can change depending how you do the linkage, and you want to ensure that you're doing the best possible linkage and reducing the bias. Another area that's quite interesting that people want to do is to relate individual records to points in space in time. So for example, do mortality rates go up when it's snowed in a particular area? And so you want to know where the deaths were, or you don't actually need to know exactly where the deaths are, but you want to be able to link them to meteorological data at that point in time. And of course, we've talked a lot about de-identification, and that's going to be very important. But of course, to do that sort of analysis, you don't actually need to know where the individual is in space and time. You just have to know what was going on and link that information in to that particular person. Again, some more methodological research that's going on is, once you've done the linked data set, you've got to evaluate and assess the quality of the linked data set. And in particular, perhaps just as the way that people working with survey data spend a lot of time worrying about non-response and attrition, and there are various methods to handle or adjust for attrition and non-response. You need to be able to develop methods to handle data linkage errors, to take into account that not all matches may be correct and we may miss some other matches. So that's the sort of methodological research that's ongoing. A bit of research that you'll hear a little bit more about in the lightning talk is looking. It's sort of halfway between methodological and substantive. So the substantive question is how well are the particular surveys capturing or representative of the population. So if you can, and there has been in 2001, and you'll hear a little bit more about 2011, linked some of the large UK surveys with census data. So that then allows you to get information about those people that don't respond to the survey, perhaps to correct for that. And in some more recent work, if you can actually link the information collected in the survey to the census, you can look to see if there are differences between how people respond to the survey and to the census. Now, people often talk about that as measurement error. I would like to just talk about, if you see there is a difference between the way people respond to the census and surveys, then that's something interesting to further investigate. I mean, it may be circumstances have changed, although we try and link censuses and surveys together at when they're occurring at the same time. We did time. Moving on away from methodological research, there's wealth, and that's not my area of expertise. I'm a methodologist, but there is so much different things that you can do for policy-related research. One of the things is that you can evaluate interventions which you didn't know happened. So, of course, with the until afterwards, because in a nicely designed survey or perhaps an intervention, you would collect some baseline data, apply the intervention, and then collect some follow-up data and see what whether there'd been a change. Whereas perhaps, for example, the financial crisis, if you've got the administrative data that's been kept over time, you can go back and collect the administrative data before the intervention and after the intervention. I mean, there are methodological issues there, but at least you can perhaps find natural experiments where now, rather than saying, oh, I wish I'd just collected some baseline data, if you could get access to the appropriate administrative data, then you might be able to get the baseline data. Clearly, the sorts of research that's been undertaken with surveys in the past can be done with administrative data, possibly by saving resources, given the data is already available, and as I've mentioned, that possibly you can link it to look at environmental issues. So once you've done that linking between space, time, and the individual, you can look at social and environmental influences on people's behaviour. Another place where administrative data is quite useful is that it's very, very large data, so it may be data for the whole of the UK. So if you're interested in ethnic minorities or inequalities between small subgroups of the population, often even in some of the excellent large surveys like Understanding Society or the BHBS, you may find that you've not got a large enough sample size of individuals that you're particularly interested in, whereas an administrative data set, you may be able to either extract all people of a particular minority if you're interested in that, or at least have a large enough sample size to be able to do some comparisons. And again, the area of the world where is known for its administrative data research, or register data research as they call it, is Scandinavia, and so there's lots of work going on there where there are examples where they can focus on pretty rare occurrences. And you probably just see that also included in this, and we've touched upon this quite a number of times today, is the focus on we have to understand also, if we're going to use administrative data, what are the governance, legal, ethical, public policy applications? So there's an area of research not actually looking at the data, but just asking the questions about how we use it and what considerations should we make. I'm not going to go through these in great detail, but these are the sorts of data sets that we have. So tax data from HMRC, benefits data from, or sorry, I shouldn't say we can facilitate access to, because we don't actually hold data. That's an issue I'll come back to. DWP data, educational data. Sometimes it's UK-wide data, sometimes it's devolved and held in the various parts of the UK. So educational data is devolved, so there are different data sets collecting slightly different information for the 4 devolved countries: the UK, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. And the same with health record data. So as I mentioned, clinical data is administrative data under my definition. It's being collected for, or the routinely collected clinical data has been collected for the purposes of patient care, and so it's an administrative data source. And again, there are various challenges because different parts of the UK hold different data sets with different structure. And again, the census. And the census, in fact, there's a census for England and Wales, there's a separate census carried out for Northern Ireland and Scotland. So what the administrative data network's aim is to facilitate access to these sorts of data sets. So there was the Administrative Data Task Force, which was funded by the Wellcome, the MRC, the ESRC, was set up to look at the barriers and the advantages of using administrative data for research purposes. So there's a huge wealth of data, and it's open data, but not that open. So there is this wealth of data that's being held by government, and David Willits was perhaps the person, the MP that pushed this, that there's this wealth of data that could be used for research purposes. We can't just make it open, but maybe in controlled manner we can use it for the public benefit, and it may save some money, of course, because we may not need to collect these data if they're already available. And also going on at the same time was a discussions about whether there should be another census, or whether we can use an administrative data-based census. So there was some discussion there. So it came out with 5 recommendations. The first one was to set up the administrative data centres, which have been set up. The second one was, it was recognised that the data sharing legislation in the UK was not the easiest to navigate and was not facilitating research in perhaps the ways it should. So there was a suggestion that legislation should be changed, and this has been much slower. There are now, as part of the digital economy legislation waiting to have its second reading, there is some provision for data sharing, including data sharing for research purposes. To set up a single UK-wide research accreditation process built on best national practice. Now that has been set up, and there is a training. It's called the SURE training, Safe Users of Research Environments, which has been set up to train people to use these controlled laboratories that I'm going to talk about in a minute. It is now, after some discussion, so I think it's one of the successes of the network. This means that this training can be transferred from the ADRN, if you want to use the VML and the ONS, if you want to use the UK data service facilities and the HMRC facilities. It's the same training, and it's transferable across the various organisations. When I started on this, I had to go to 3 different training sessions where I was trained with very similar things. One to use the UK data service, one to use the VML, one to use the ADRN. So that has been put in place. And the ONS has recently done a piece of work on accredited researchers. So if you were an accredited researcher with the ONS recently, you probably received an email asking you to transfer to a new scheme. Come up with a strategy for engaging with the public. So whatever the network does, and its former, and it was set up with public engagement, it's to gauge the public opinion of what we're doing. And it was suggested, which was the good news for the universities that succeeded in getting the centres and the service, there was some funding to put up. So the ADRC-E received funding to fund the setting up of this network along the lines suggested by the UK Data Task Force. So, as I've said, it set up one centre in each of the UK countries, bearing in mind some of the barriers was that data in a particular country is not permitted to leave that country. So sometimes the data within the current legislation, Northern Ireland data, certain Northern Ireland data needs to stay in Northern Ireland, and we're trying to facilitate access to that across the network. There was an administrative data service set up, which will be the coordinating role and the hub, as it were, of the administrative data network. It has a website. It's the central point of access for researchers, and it has key roles in public engagement outreach and oversaw the development of the policies. It was part of the funding that each administrative data centre was partnered with its national statistical organisation. So I think that's, no, I'll come back to that in a moment. So it was recognised that you can't get access to administrative data, government administrative, if you don't work in partnership with the national statistical organisations or with government. So the English Centre, very briefly, it's a consortium of the University of Southampton with University College London, the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, the Institute of Fiscal Studies, and of course the Office for National Statistics. And I mean, I'm the director, and we have some deputy directors, including representation from ONS. It was set up to provide various expertise. Southampton has the expertise in official statistics and social statistics. Clearly, the Institute of Fiscal Studies has expertise in that area, and in epidemiology, in particular, London School of Hygiene, Tropical Medicine, and UCL. Just to show the other parts of the network, they include a governing board, which guides the strategic direction of the network, and it's hosted by the UK Statistical Authority and provides directly to Parliament a report on the progress of the network. It has, as I said, there is this, the Administrative Data Services in Essex. In Northern Ireland, it's a consortium led by Queen's Belfast, and in collaboration with NISRA, the Northern Ireland Statistical Research Agency, which is their equivalent of ONS. Similarly, Scotland, it's led now by Edinburgh and in conjunction with with Scottish Government, and again Wales. The main centre is at Swansea, which is also in partnership with Welsh Government. So each of these centres provides state-of-the-art facilities for researchers to access de-identified, so the data is de-identified administrative data. There is support, data management support, statistical analysis expertise to enable external researchers to access these data. They're also conducting ongoing research themselves, both on methodological and some substantive programs. They are providing the training, so if you want to become a SURE trainer, one way of doing that is to do it through the administrative network. So, what, 5 more minutes? So if you want to use the network, so this is just a brief guide to how you might use the network. So there are various requirements. So it's aimed to support researchers from academia, government, or independent research organisations. So if you have an idea that you think that it would benefit using administrative data, you can approach the ADS and discuss the project with them, whether it's feasible. You then have to develop a project approval, which is goes to an independent approvals panel, which has to assess it for some criteria, which are on my next slide. And then what was the challenging bit in the past is that the ADS, along with the administrative data centres, do the negotiations on your behalf. In the meantime, you can go and become an accredited trainer. Once the data has been secured, the projects are wanting to link administrative data, so there is a process to de-identify them and to link them via what's called a trusted party. So I won't go into that, but the idea is to ensure, in fact, that very early on in the process, the identifiers are removed from the attribute data, and there is a journey where they don't see each other again, so that you can create a linked administrative data set by removing the identifiers quite early on. So all currently the access to this data is all under the controlled environment. So it will be in secure labs around the UK. And as was mentioned earlier, once you've got access in the secure laboratory to undertake the analysis, there will be some statistical disclosure control before you can actually take the outputs away. And as a recommendation for the data task force, and there is some discussion ongoing about this, it was agreed that we weren't to become data warehouses. So the initial setup is that data should be destroyed, meaning the linked data set. The original data sets will still exist. There is ongoing discussions about whether that's cost effective and whether it's the best way to do things. But to try and at least have some possibility of reusability, it's part of engagement in the network that the documentation and the code will be maintained. And again, part of the agreement of using the network is to provide summaries of your research. And the only way we're going to get this network to succeed is to have good news stories, public benefit stories based on this work. So there is, I know I went to talk a bit about impact, but so there is part of the procedure support to advertise and disseminate your findings, because the only way we're going to succeed is to demonstrate that linking administrative data can lead to public benefit. There are some conditions. You can find all these on the ADRN website, but this is being funded through the research through the ADRC, so a project must be purely for non-commercial research. It is assessed, it must be feasible, viable, ethical. This is what the approvals panel will assess. Again, there must be a case, you must demonstrate the need for using administrative data, and given where the funding has come from, it needs to be in line with the economic and social science area. So that's, given interdisciplinary research, then that's really quite broad, but it is a funding through the ADRC. It is available to government researchers, but it should be for research rather than for operational businesses. And it's probably off the bottom, but it's important that the results are published. So you can't take some research, government, and not publish them. You're required to publish the results, at least through the website. Shall I stop there? I've said, I mean, Southampton has everything. I could say again what Southampton has, but it has everything that the network has. So maybe I should stop there and allow a few time for questions.
Thanks, Peter. We've got 5 minutes for questions. Back there.
Thanks very much. That was very interesting. Just because I've just gone through a process of trying to negotiate access to some government data, and I wanted to know how does you sort of broker between the researcher and the government department? How does that affect, or does it not, sidestep the contracts teams at universities? So I had to go through UCL contracts.
Yeah.
Does that just get sidestepped when you do this?
There are I mean, it's a long answer, but it depends. The AD, some of it will, but not all of it. You will have to. The researcher has to sign an agreement with the administrative data, the secure facility that they're getting access to, but the data controller will be the centre that's got the data.
Okay.
So.
And may I ask one other question?
Yeah.
How long does the process take from when you showed how you'd go about doing it, from approaching you to then getting the data?
That's a difficult question because we're quite new and we're still going through the process.
Okay.
So
Sure.
the aim is to be quicker than I've been told. In the past, it could be up to 2 years to get access to data, and so our aim is to reduce that. And perhaps more of the aim is to reduce the burden on the researcher, so that, because if you've been through it, you are getting forms and various forms to fill in and questions, and so maybe it will not be that much quicker, but maybe it'll be smoother. So people have been put off from doing this sort of work who talk to colleagues because they've heard that it's a lot of process. And so one of the aims of the network in the early stages is, we hope it will become routine in the future, but at the early stages of the network is to work with you, provide you the support, and maybe, if you're patient, not bother you for a few months while the negotiations are going on, and learn and share experience of different departments. There's different ways in, so that's what we're building up, that area of expertise.
Thank you. I think we've got a question on the far side there, and then you next after that.
Thanks for that. You said at the end that it has to be of clear public benefit.
Sorry, I shouldn't have said potential public benefits.
Because I was wondering how that would fit with effectively blue skies academic thinking.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to say you can't do this. Because
Sorry, yeah, it's probably well. So the term in the conditions are potential public benefit. Yes, but still, for those of you who've filled in impact case studies, my training is in mathematics, and so how do you say math? I mean, it's that story, but it's, in some senses, we've got to convince these departments that are very busy and have other things on their mind, especially now, to release data. And the way we're going to show that is in the end. So we need some that demonstrate clear public benefit, but at the start of the process, yes, they've got to at least have articulated how this has potential benefit. Yeah, thank you for.
And I think this is our last question.
Oh, thank you. It's only a quick one. It's a very selfish question as well. Are you talking to the Ministry of Justice or the Home Office about crime data? I've been through the mill a few times with freedom of information requests about data pertaining to offending and prisoners, and they're very coy about sharing it. And I wondered if something like this might maybe open up a channel of communication between them and us.
We are talking to them. Based on what I would encourage you to do if you want to is talk to the Administrative Data Service and join the. We haven't had a lot of requests for those data, so we're currently focusing on the departments where there are about 40 projects that have been approved so far, and there are some key data owners there, although we are talking. I know colleagues have talked to the Ministry of Justice.
Okay.
So.
I'm very interested to chat to you afterwards.
Yeah. So you probably know a little.
Yeah.
Because there's something they're called the Justice Lab.
Yeah.
The Justice Lab, and they run a brokerage between people who are doing things with offenders when they come out of prison. So they're charities and things. Yes, Justice Lab runs, and so you submit your clients, and they do the mixing with the offenders, and they give you the rates back to look at the impact of what you've done. So that's still it's a very very good system. I don't know if I think you have to pay for it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, well,
Not
sorry,
very much,
I didn't. The Administrative Data Network funding so it's free at the point of delivery unless there is a charge for the data. So some places like the HSCIC charge for data processing. So the network can cover that, but we've had to make a distinction. I mean, it's only a finite pot of money, but there is. So the idea is that these facilities are provided free to the researcher, subject to if there's a recognised cost for data, then that would be passed on.